Now we continue with one of our top stories for today, the former President Jacob Zuma's corruption case, which resumed today. The matter was postponed until the 8th of September to allow the NPA to furnish Zuma's legal team with further particulars. We now take a closer look at how the media has been covering the case since 2018. I am now joined by political analyst Thabo Shole Mashau. A very good afternoon to you, Thabo, and thank you for your time today. Perhaps let's go back to, thank you, Thabo. Perhaps let's go back to the beginning of the entire arms deal way back in 1999. A lot of people, and I don't know if you would see this, but the fact that at that time, former President Jacob Zuma was actually in provincial government and actually was not even a deputy at that particular time, and yet so much of the focus and so much of the responsibility of that arms deal has been weighed upon his shoulders. Do you think that there's been a lot of spotlight specifically on former President Jacob Zuma as opposed to perhaps the deputy president at the time and other stakeholders who were integral to this particular deal?
I think the arms deal, as you would know, Thami, throughout the world, it involves a number of players. You have government, you have huge multi-billion multinationals, and you have interest groups as well within those who are seeking to make commission by linking individuals, parties and government and so on. So I think it has rather been unfair, but such is the nature of this beast. If you are I think what also dragged him into the middle of this whole furore was his financial advisor, the Shabir Sheikh, as we know, when he was put on trial and the issues about him, his claim to fame, so to speak, was Jacob Zuma. But to answer your question directly, it would rather be unfair because it takes more than just one person, especially in the person of Jacob Zuma, to be so influential to tilt things in a certain direction all by himself. He wouldn't be able to do that by himself. Unfortunately, his rise to power, his proximity to Shabir Sheikh, and the political events that unfolded post that particular period placed him there. However, it has been unfair. Thami, you would know that even today, when we are talking about that trial, you and I, we would, in the media, we would often refer it to as the Zuma trial of sorts. And a lot of people have kind of forgotten what these issues are all about. And no one even cares, at least those who are not in the know, about who Thales is. And the fact that there were Thompson CSF, the fact that this company that should be on trial, and I'm not excusing former president in any way, but this company that we all need to be looking at because it was involved even with the apartheid government since 1969 when P.W. Botha was still the minister of defense at the time when he went to France and met the CEO of Thompson at the time. So I think we need to adequately split our attention as the media on all parties concerned. Of course, Jacob Zuma is one of those.
When former President Thabo Mbeki was asked about the arms deal, many times he said that there was no arms deal, and as far as he is concerned, everything was done above board. Do you think enough attention has been given to him and even the likes of Joe Modise?
No. I don't think they were given enough attention, especially taking into consideration their positioning at the time. The fact that, at that time he was deputy president of a massive country that was procuring arms. And in that case, we know that we are talking about those 4 corvettes, and Thompson CSF which is now Thales, was involved with the machinery or the brain of those corvettes. I don't think President Thabo Mbeki the spotlight was much on him. I don't think it was on the defense minister at the time, the late Joe Modise, and I don't think it was also, by the way, who was president at the time? Our favorite, Nelson Mandela. None of us dare speak about that, right? And so we have not evenly spread the due attention on parties that were involved. And President Jacob Zuma, sadly, he has carried this, especially with a lot of cases, this cloud above him and whether it was intentional or not, whether it was the machinery of negative publicity against him or not, of someone who's corrupt, someone who's involved in various dealings. But I think this was also one of those nails on that particular coffin that you're speaking about. But you're right, Thami. We should be asking, how was the former president involved in all of this, if at all, the deputy, the defense ministers, and who else was involved in the deal?
What we do know, and what was rumored, is that a large part of the money that came from the arms deal was used to finance the campaign for the ANC in 1999. So the ANC itself is a bit of a role player in this too. Have they been looked at all?
No, again, they haven't. But also, money trail, one of the things that we are not necessarily privy to is the proper money trail, the paper trail as to money moving from these hands to this hands and the other. But if at all they did benefit, and we can point to it, we needed to also shine the limelight on the party and say, how do you receive money of this nature? But also there's a thin line between party and state. And I'm not as ignorant as to believe that a party, especially the one in governance, would not necessarily have a way of somehow funding its projects, programs through some means in the state, because we know that indirectly or directly a party would benefit. But I think the mirror should be on the media, the South African media in particular in this instance, Thami, when you're raising those critical questions. Why have we not? Why have we not dug a little bit deeper?
And I'm asking you to answer that question. With all these various stakeholders and all these various players into this arms deal, why has the focus been exclusively on former President Zuma?
I wouldn't pretend that I hold brief for media or I'm the spokesperson, but I'd attempt to answer the question and saying at times we have this pack mentality in the media that Thami has broken the story and this is the angle. Thabo and the others would just follow willy-nilly, blindly. But second to that is the capacity of media houses to explore the proper trails and investigations and the backstories and so on. As you would know how thin the staff in the newsrooms are, particularly of late, but that has always been a problem. But also the capacity of the newsrooms to say we are dedicating these resources specifically to this story. And it's got some international aspect to it which may not necessarily interest a lot of people. And that's why when I started with that background, Thami, that Thales has been involved with the apartheid South Africa. As a matter of fact, when the United Nations Security Council in 1977 put an embargo of arms in South Africa for the world to stop supplying arms to South Africa, based on the death of Steve Biko, the 1976 uprising and the political upheavals of the time, the UN said stop dealing with South Africa as far as arms are concerned. This company that is on trial now was supplying South Africa with arms, backhandedly. And so those are making that reference to show you that those are the backstories that should be out there, that are not necessarily there. The players should be out there. But again, our pack mentality that we'll all follow the same angle, the same route. It's
Thabo,
easier.
we're fast running out of time, but I just want to pose this last question to you before I release you. Yes, you've perhaps alluded to the laziness of newsrooms and the thinness of staff, etc. But a lot of citizens have actually accused the media of having some sort of an agenda themselves, an anti-Zuma agenda. Your response to that?
I wouldn't, and I'll be very brief, Thami, due to time. I wouldn't think that is necessarily misplaced. It's not completely true, but it's not necessarily misplaced, and it's not completely false. We have seen our colleagues, and I'm not going to mention their names in the media, who have been involved in party factional battles as opposed to doing their jobs. Their angles, their persistent storylines, they would take one slant. So I wouldn't think the public is completely wrong, off the rails with that. But yeah, I don't think it's as horrible as that. But I honestly think that they are onto something, and I wouldn't debate with that viewpoint.
All right, well, Thabo, thank you so much for your insight there. We do know that the arms deal back in the spotlight in South Africa, and moving forward, we'll see how the media actually continues to cover this particular trial, as well as what the former president will be revealing when he does take the stand.